stop. Stop right now!
Curtis Lancaster had just entered the Hargrove Grand Kitchen when Derek Sinclair blocked his way.
I'm here for the head chef position,
Curtis said calmly. Derek scrutinized him head to toe, as if something were stuck to his shoe.
Are you kidding?
Curtis held out his hand.
Curtis Lancaster, I submitted. I don't shake hands with filthy people like you.
Derek snatched the resume and threw it into a basin of dirty water.
Customers would be disgusted knowing you touched their food.
He tossed Curtis a dirty apron.
Wash dishes. Go!
Curtis watched 15 years of training sink into murky water. Picked up the apron, without a word, walked away. But 11 days later, when the hotel owner tasted his food, the man who drowned his resume would lose it all. The Hargrove Grand Hotel had stood on the corner of King and Broad Street in Charleston, South Carolina for exactly 100 years. It was the kind of place where senators held private dinners, where old money families celebrated weddings that cost more than most people's houses, and where the walls themselves seemed to whisper that you either belonged or you didn't. The lobby was all marble and crystal, fresh magnolias and silver vases, a concierge who remembered your name from 3 years ago. But the crown jewel of the Hargrove Grand wasn't the rooftop terrace or the hand-painted murals in the ballroom. It was the restaurant on the second floor, the Pemberton Room. For decades, the Pemberton Room had been one of the finest dining establishments in the American South. It once held a Michelin star. Food critics from New York and London flew in just to taste the menu. Magazines ran features on the wine cellar alone. But that was before Derek Sinclair took over. In 8 years as kitchen director, Derek quietly lost the star. Reviews slipped from extraordinary to competent. Reservations thinned. He blamed the economy, the critics, the suppliers, the servers. He blamed everyone except himself. Now, in just 11 days, the hotel was hosting the most important night in its history, the Centennial Gala. 200 guests, national press. The most feared food critic on the East Coast, Vivian Holt, had confirmed her seat. And for the first time in 2 years, the reclusive owner Eleanor Pemberton was returning from her estate in Savannah to attend in person. Everything had to be flawless. And the man best qualified to make that happen was on his knees in the dish pit, scrubbing burnt grease off a sheet pan. Curtis Lancaster grew up in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, in a shotgun house that always smelled like garlic and cayenne. His grandmother, Odette Lancaster, ran an unlicensed restaurant out of her kitchen. 5 tables, no sign on the door, and a line down the block every Friday night. She cooked Creole food that made grown men cry. Gumbo that tasted like forgiveness. Beignets that tasted like home. Curtis was 6 when his great-uncle Terry put a wooden spoon in his hand and said, "Stir slow, baby. Food knows when you're rushing." By 14, he could break down a whole chicken in 90 seconds. By 17, he had memorized every recipe in his grandmother's leather-bound journal, the same journal she placed in his hands the day he left for Paris. "This is everything I know," she told him. "Take it somewhere bigger than this kitchen." He did. Curtis won a full scholarship to Le Cordon Bleu. He was the youngest in his class and the only black student in the program. He graduated top 3. But what changed his life wasn't the diploma. It was the man who watched him cook during his final exam, Chef Augustin Morel. Morel was a legend, a recluse who ran a 2-star Michelin restaurant in Lyon and turned down the 3rd star twice because he said it attracted the wrong kind of people. He hadn't taken an apprentice in 15 years. But that afternoon, he watched a 20-year-old black kid from New Orleans execute a sauce béarnaise with a wrist technique he had never seen. A technique Curtis learned not from a textbook, but from stirring roux in his grandmother's kitchen. Morel took him in. For 5 years, Curtis lived and cooked in Lyon, absorbing classical French technique while quietly weaving in the Creole soul of his childhood. Morel didn't just allow it, he encouraged it. He annotated Odette's journal himself, bridging two traditions in his tiny handwriting, connecting worlds no one had thought to join. When Morel was dying of cancer 2 years ago, he gave Curtis two things. The first was the journal, now a fusion masterwork of Creole heritage and French haute cuisine. The second was a sealed envelope, a letter of recommendation, closed with wax. Open it only when the world tries to tell you who you are, Morel said. Curtis carried that envelope for 2 years, through grief, through rejection, through 14 hours of driving from New Orleans to Charleston for a job interview that lasted 4 seconds. He had never opened it. But inside his locker in the basement of the Hargrove Grand, tucked behind the filthy apron they gave him, both the journal and the envelope sat waiting, for the moment they were needed most. For the first 3 days, Curtis Lancaster did not exist. Not as a chef, not as a person, not even as a name. He was the dishwasher. Derek told the staff Curtis was a walk-in off the street, desperate for hourly work. No training, no credentials, just hands to scrub pots. And so, Curtis scrubbed. Sheet pans caked with burnt fond, stock pots crusted with dried sauce, hotel pans so black with grease they had never been properly cleaned. The water was scalding, his knuckles cracked by the end of the first shift, his palms peeled raw by the second. Steam rose from the basin and clung to his face like a second skin. These were the same hands that once plated a 7-course tasting menu at a 2-star Michelin restaurant in Lyon. The same fingers Chef Augustin Morel called the most intuitive he had ever seen. Now buried in gray water, scraping leftover food off plates that lesser cooks had prepared. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody looked at him. Derek made sure of that. On the second morning, Derek held a staff meeting to discuss the centennial gala menu. 7 French courses for 200 guests, including Eleanor Pemberton herself. Curtis stood at the back in his dishwasher apron, listening. When Derek reached the 4th course, pan-seared duck with cherry gastrique, Curtis noticed the wine pairing was wrong. A heavy Cabernet would crush the delicate cherry reduction. A lighter Pinot Noir would let the gastrique breathe. He knew this like his own heartbeat. So he spoke. "Excuse me, a Pinot Noir might pair better with the gastrique. The Cabernet could—" The kitchen went silent. Every head turned. Derek stared at him. Then a slow smirk crept across his face. Did the dishwasher just try to tell me about wine pairings? He looked around the room. Anyone find that funny? Glenn Archer laughed first. Then half the kitchen joined. Derek walked toward Curtis until they were inches apart. His voice dropped. You don't speak in my kitchen. You don't have opinions in my kitchen. You scrub what I tell you and go home. You are nothing in here. Understand? Curtis lowered his eyes. Yes, chef. Get back to your hole. Curtis returned to the dish pit. The laughter behind him continued for 30 seconds. By day 4, the cruelty graduated from words to routine. Glenn started sending back pans that were already spotless, claiming he could still see grease on the handles. Curtis rewashed them without complaint. Glenn sent them back again and again. A game designed to grind a man down, one pan at a time. The line cooks watched it happen and said nothing, because speaking up meant becoming the next target. That same afternoon, Nora Briscoe, the senior line cook who survived 10 years under Derek by keeping her mouth shut, was struggling with a hollandaise that kept breaking. 3rd attempt, eggs separating, butter splitting, 40 minutes to service, and the sauce was dead. Curtis was at the dish pit, 15 feet away. He could see the problem. Heat too high, the emulsion shocked. He waited until Glenn left the station, walked over, and whispered, "Drop the heat. Teaspoon of cold water. Whisk from the center out." Nora hesitated, then did exactly what he said. The hollandaise came together in 30 seconds. Perfect, silky, flawless. She stared at the sauce, then at him. How did you... Glenn was already behind them. What the hell are you doing near my station? He grabbed Curtis by the apron and shoved him hard into the dish rack. Pans crashed to the tile. Derek, your dishwasher is putting his filthy hands on my mise en place. Derek appeared. He did not ask what happened. One more time. Touch my food, talk to my cooks, step outside that dish pit, and you are gone. No reference, no final check. Gone. Curtis steadied himself against the rack, walked back without a word. The next morning brought the worst of it. Glenn found Curtis's locker open and pulled out the leather journal. He flipped through the pages, reading Odette's handwritten Creole recipes in a loud, mocking voice, deliberately butchering the French annotations. What is this, Grandma's little cookbook? He waved it at the line cooks. The dishwasher thinks he's a chef because his granny scribbled down how to fry catfish and boil crawfish. Two cooks laughed. One turned away, but said nothing. Curtis's jaw tightened. His fists clenched at his sides until the veins rose in his forearms. Every nerve screamed at him to move. But his grandmother once told him something he wore like armor. The fire that cooks the meal and the fire that burns the house down are the same fire, baby. You choose which one you are. Glenn tossed the journal. It hit the wet floor by the drain, pages splaying open, soaking up gray water. Curtis bent down slowly, picked it up with both hands, dried each page with a clean towel, and placed it back in his locker without looking at anyone. That night, alone in his rented room, he opened the journal to a page in Odette's handwriting. The ink was faded, the edges gone soft as cloth. Baby, food is the only language that don't need translation. You cook with love, and the world will hear you. He closed the journal, did not cry, just sat in the dark and breathed. Meanwhile, someone else in that hotel had been watching all of it. Raymond Cross, the 68-year-old retired sommelier who still haunted the wine cellar, had seen everything unfold. The re-washed clean pans, the hollandaise rescue, the way Curtis instinctively tilted a saucepan to check the copper core's heat distribution, a reflex that lived only in the muscle memory of classically trained chefs. No dishwasher on earth would ever carry it. One quiet afternoon, Raymond sat across from Curtis during a break and placed a glass of red wine on the table without saying a word. Curtis picked it up, swirled, sniffed, took one slow sip. 2016 Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Southern Rhône, Grenache dominant, clay and limestone soil. Probably Beaucastel, but the tannin structure feels more like Vieux Télégraphe. Raymond set down his own glass. In 40 years as a sommelier, he had tested hundreds of professionals. Most could name the region. A truly great one could name the vineyard. Curtis had narrowed it to 2 estates, both legitimate candidates for that exact vintage. You're no dishwasher, son, Raymond said quietly. Curtis looked down at his cracked, blistered, peeling hands. Right now, he said quietly, I am. Raymond said nothing more. But that night, sitting alone at home, he picked up the phone and made a call he had not made in a very long time. Day 6 changed everything. It was a Friday night. The Pemberton room was at full capacity, every table occupied, every ticket urgent. The kitchen was controlled chaos, burners roaring, pans clanging, Derek barking orders from the pass like a man conducting a war. Then, the new line cook burned the cherry gastrique. The entire batch. Gone. Black smoke curled from the saucepan. The smell of scorched fruit filled the kitchen like a warning. Derek spun around and saw the ruined pot. His face went from red to white in 2 seconds. There was no backup. The gastrique was the foundation of the fourth course, pan-seared duck breast, the signature dish on tonight's menu. Without it, every plate waiting on the pass was dead. Tickets were stacking, 12 tables, 26 covers. The servers were already asking questions. Derek screamed at the line cook. Glenn fumbled through the walk-in looking for more cherries. There were none. The kitchen was seizing up, order by order, plate by plate, and no one knew what to do. Curtis was at the dish pit, 15 feet away. He could smell the burnt sugar. He could hear the panic. His hands were still, his eyes were not. Every instinct in his body said move, but Derek's voice echoed in his skull. Touch my food, and you're gone. Then a server pushed through the kitchen doors carrying a plate, a return dish. The guest, a Charleston City Councilwoman and longtime regular, had sent it back with 3 words: flavorless and overcooked. Derek's jaw locked. Glenn froze. The line cook stared at the plate like it was a verdict. Curtis dried his hands on his apron, walked to the nearest prep station, took a clean saucepan, and in front of everyone, without asking permission, without saying a word, he began to cook. 90 seconds. That was all it took. He pulled fresh cherries from the garnish station, deglazed the pan with red wine, not the cooking wine on Derek's station, but a better bottle he spotted on the speed rack. He reduced it fast over high heat, adjusting by instinct. A touch of black pepper, a splash of aged sherry vinegar. Then, at the very end, a whisper of allspice, ground fine, barely a quarter teaspoon. Allspice, his grandmother's secret. The ingredient that turned every Creole sauce Odette Lancaster ever made into something people remembered for years. He set the saucepan on the pass, stepped back, returned to the dish pit. No announcement, no explanation. Just the sauce, sitting there, gleaming dark red under the heat lamps. Nora reached it first. She dipped a spoon and tasted. Her eyes closed. She tasted it again. Then she plated 2 portions without a word and sent them to the dining room. 4 minutes later, the server came back. Not with a complaint, with a message. Table 12 says it's the best sauce they've had in this restaurant. The councilwoman wants to meet the chef. Derek straightened his collar, smoothed his hair, walked out to table 12 with the smile of a man accepting credit for something he did not create. Curtis watched from the dish pit, said nothing. But Nora had seen everything. She stood at her station, gripping the edge of the counter, staring at the saucepan Curtis had used. The residue inside told a story. The layering technique, the deglaze pattern, the timing. This was not the work of a dishwasher. This was not even the work of a competent cook. This was the work of someone operating at a level she had never personally witnessed. And across the dining room, Raymond Cross had seen it too. He had watched Curtis walk to the stove and back, watched the 90-second performance from a corner table where he sat cataloging wine inventory. He caught Nora's eye through the kitchen window. She held his gaze for a long moment. No words were needed between them. That night, after service, Nora sat in her car in the parking lot and searched Curtis Lancaster Chef on her phone. It took 3 scrolls to find it. A 5-year-old article from a Lyon food magazine. The photo showed a young black man standing beside an elderly French chef, both smiling, both in white coats. The headline read, "Morel's prodigious American apprentice stuns Lyon culinary circle." Nora stared at the screen for a full minute. Then she took a screenshot and slid it under Raymond Cross's door before driving home. The alliance had begun, and the clock was ticking. After the gastrique incident, Curtis Lancaster could no longer be invisible. He had tried. For 6 days he had kept his head down, his mouth shut, and his hands in dirty water. But the kitchen would not let him stay hidden. On day 7, a delivery of high-grade Wagyu arrived mislabeled. 2 cases of Japanese A5 Wagyu, the most expensive beef on earth, over $200 a pound, marked with the wrong cut specifications. Glenn Archer pulled the first slab onto the cutting board and reached for his boning knife, preparing to butcher it using standard USDA prime technique. Straight cuts, grid pattern, the same approach you would use on a supermarket ribeye. Curtis saw it from the dish pit, and his stomach turned. A 5 Wagyu has a completely different fat structure. The marbling runs in delicate webs through the muscle. Standard cuts would shred 30% of the intramuscular fat and destroy the texture that made the beef worth its price. Glenn was about to ruin $8,000 of meat. Curtis did not think. He moved. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides, placed his hand on the cutting board beside Glenn's knife, and said quietly, "Stop. You'll lose a third of the yield cutting it that way." Glenn's face twisted. "Get your hands off my station. The grain runs lateral on A5. You need to cut with the marbling, not across it." Curtis picked up a second knife, not aggressively, not fast, just with the calm authority of a man who had done this 1,000 times, and demonstrated on the edge of the slab. One clean stroke. The fat stayed intact, the slice fell away perfect, glistening, every thread of marbling preserved. 2 line cooks stopped what they were doing and watched. One of them whispered to the other, "Where the hell did the dishwasher learn to do that?" Glenn shoved Curtis's hand away. "Nobody asked you." But the evidence was sitting on the cutting board. Glenn's cut beside Curtis's cut. One was butchered, the other was art. Even Glenn could see the difference. And the fact that he could see it made him angrier. Derek arrived within minutes. Glenn reported Curtis for overstepping. Derek didn't look at the Wagyu, didn't compare the cuts, didn't care about the $8,000 at stake. He looked at Curtis and said, "I warned you. One more time, and you're done." Curtis held Derek's gaze for 3 full seconds, longer than he ever had. Then he turned and walked back to the dish pit without a word. But something had shifted in that 3-second stare. Derek felt it. The entire kitchen felt it. That night, Raymond Cross made his move. He had spent 2 days since receiving Nora's screenshot quietly verifying everything. The Le Cordon Bleu graduation records, the Lyon apprenticeship under Morel, the 5 years at a 2-star Michelin restaurant. Everything on Curtis's resume, the one Derek had drowned in dirty water, was real. Raymond visited Eleanor Pemberton's personal assistant at the hotel's front office. He requested a small addition to the centennial gala wine list, a specific Burgundy, a Gevrey Chambertin that paired beautifully with Creole-influenced French cuisine. The assistant asked why such an unusual selection. Raymond smiled and said only, "Mrs. Pemberton will understand when the time comes." Then he did something far more important. He placed Curtis's Le Cordon Bleu certificate, a printed copy of the Lyon magazine article, and a handwritten note inside a sealed envelope. The note read, "There is a man in your building who trained under Augustin Morel. For 10 days, he has been washing your dishes." He addressed the envelope to Eleanor Pemberton and left it at the front desk, with instructions to deliver it the morning of the gala, not before. The timing had to be exact. On day 9, Derek struck back. He could feel the kitchen shifting beneath him. Small things he couldn't prove, but sensed, like a change in air pressure. The line cooks were glancing toward the dish pit more often. Nora was plating with more confidence, using techniques he had never taught her. Something was happening in his kitchen that he did not control. And for a man like Derek Sinclair, loss of control was the same as death. His response was surgical. He reassigned Curtis from the dish pit to outdoor garbage detail for the entire gala preparation week. No more kitchen access. No more proximity to food or cooks. Curtis would spend his remaining days hauling trash bags from the loading dock to the dumpsters in the back alley. It was not a lateral move. It was an exile. When Curtis received the reassignment, he stood still for a long moment. For the first time since arriving at the Hargrove Grand, something flashed across his face that was not patience. It was anger, raw and real and barely contained. His hand moved to his locker where the leather journal sat waiting. He gripped the metal door until his knuckles whitened. Then he breathed, closed the locker, picked up the garbage cart, and walked out the back door into the alley without a word. Nora watched him go. That night, she did something she had never done in 10 years at the hotel. She went to Derek's office after hours and spoke her mind. "The gala menu needs more depth," she said carefully. "Maybe we should consider other talent in the building, someone with fresh perspective." Derek leaned back in his chair. His eyes were flat and cold. "If you want to join him hauling trash, keep talking." Nora left the office, but she did not stop. She found Raymond in the wine cellar and told him what happened. Raymond listened. Then he showed her the envelope he had prepared for Eleanor Pemberton. 2 more days, Raymond said. That's all we need. 2 days. The centennial gala was in just 2 days. And that same evening, the final piece of pressure arrived. An email confirmation from Vivian Holt's office. The most feared food critic on the East Coast had finalized her seat assignment. Table 1, directly in front of the kitchen pass. Her review could make or break a restaurant in a single paragraph. She had destroyed careers with a sentence. She had also launched them. Derek read the email 3 times. His hands trembled on the keyboard. He ordered double prep, triple quality checks. He called a staff meeting and screamed for 45 minutes about standards and precision and legacy. But the man most capable of delivering on those words was outside in the alley, dragging trash bags through the cold November rain. And he had no idea that 2 people inside that building were quietly fighting to bring him back. Day 10, the eve of the gala, and the kitchen of the Hargrove Grand was falling apart. It started at 4 in the afternoon. The head line cook doubled over at his station, clutching his stomach. Within 20 minutes, he was vomiting in the staff bathroom. Within the hour, 2 more cooks went down. Same symptoms, same violence. Food poisoning. Severe. The source was traced quickly. Contaminated oysters. The same oysters Derek had insisted on sourcing from a cheaper supplier 6 weeks ago, overruling Nora's warning that the vendor had no HACCP certification. She had told him to his face. He had told her to mind her station. Now 3 of his 5 line cooks were in the back of an ambulance, and the most important dinner in the hotel's 100-year history was 6 hours away. Derek made calls. Every temp agency in Charleston, every culinary contact he had. No one could supply Michelin-caliber cooks on 6 hours' notice. The kitchen was gutted. Glenn Archer stood at the pass, pale and useless. He could prep. He could follow directions. But he could not lead a service. Everyone knew it. At 5 o'clock, Eleanor Pemberton walked into the kitchen unannounced. 74 years old. Silver hair pulled tight. She moved through the chaos with the calm of a woman who had built an empire and watched lesser men stumble trying to run it. She surveyed the empty stations, the half-prepped mise en place, the tickets that would start printing in 4 hours with no one competent to answer them. She looked at Derek and asked one question. "Where is your contingency, Mr. Sinclair?" Derek opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was when Raymond Cross stepped through the kitchen door, carrying a single sealed envelope. He walked past Derek without a glance, stopped in front of Eleanor, and placed it in her hands. "There is a man in this building who has been here for 10 days, Raymond said. He trained at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. He apprenticed under Augustin Morel in Lyon for 5 years. He is one of the most capable chefs I have ever encountered. And for every single one of those 10 days, he has been washing dishes and hauling garbage in your hotel. Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside, Curtis's Le Cordon Bleu certificate, the Lyon magazine article, a young black man beside Augustin Morel, both in white coats, and Raymond's handwritten note. She read every word. Her eyes stopped on Morel's name. She had known Augustin Morel personally. She had dined at his restaurant in Lyon twice. She once called it the finest meal of her life. "Where is he?" she said. They found Curtis in the back alley, behind the hotel. He was in work clothes, rain-soaked, lifting a garbage bag into the dumpster. His hands were raw, his back was bent. Eleanor Pemberton stepped into the alley. Curtis turned and saw a 74-year-old woman in silk standing 3 feet from a dumpster, holding a photograph of him beside the greatest chef he had ever known. "You trained under Augustine," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am. I was his last. He once told me he had one student who understood food the way a poet understands grief." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. "Was that you?" Curtis did not answer with words. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the sealed envelope Morel had given him 2 years ago. Unopened, untouched, carried through grief, through rejection, through 10 days of silence in this hotel. He handed it to Eleanor. She broke the wax seal, read it. Her hand trembled. She folded the letter and looked at Curtis for a long time, without speaking. Then she turned to Derek, who had followed her out and now stood 3 steps behind, watching his world come apart. Her voice was ice. "This man will lead your kitchen tonight. If you have a problem with that, your resignation will be accepted before the first course." Derek said absolutely nothing. Curtis set down the garbage bag, walked past Derek without looking at him, through the back door, down the hallway, and into the kitchen, not through the dish pit entrance, but through the main doors. The line cooks looked up. Glenn Archer's face drained of all color. Nora Briscoe closed her eyes and exhaled for the first time in 10 days. Curtis Lancaster was no longer the dishwasher, and the clock had already started. 6 o'clock, 3 hours to service, 200 guests arriving at 9. Curtis stood in the kitchen he had been forbidden to enter for 10 days. He placed his grandmother's leather journal on the stainless steel counter and opened it. The pages were still slightly warped from the dirty water Glenn had dropped it in. Some of the ink had bled. But every recipe was legible. Every annotation Morel had written in the margins was intact. He looked at Derek's 7-course menu pinned above the pass. He read each dish carefully. Competent food, textbook French, the kind of menu a culinary school graduate would produce to impress a hiring committee. Technically correct, emotionally empty. No story, no soul, no risk. Curtis unpinned it, set it aside, and began writing a new menu from memory. 7 courses, classical French technique fused with Louisiana Creole heritage. Every dish would honor 2 people, Odette Lancaster and Augustin Morel. Every plate would tell the story of a grandmother's kitchen in New Orleans and a master's restaurant in Lyon. He would cook the food that lived in the journal, the food that existed nowhere else on earth. 3 hours, 7 courses, 200 guests, from scratch. No safety net, no second chance. It was either genius or suicide. Nora stepped forward first. "Tell me what you need." Then a second cook, then a third. Even the one remaining healthy line cook, a kid named Wilson, who had barely spoken all week, tied his apron tighter and took position. Glenn Archer stood in the corner, arms folded, jaw clenched, refusing to move. Curtis did not look at him. He did not need to. Nora, I need every crawfish in the walk-in cleaned and deveined in 20 minutes. Wilson, start the stock. Chicken bones, celery, thyme, bay leaf. Low and slow. Nobody touches the short ribs except me. The reduction takes 3 full hours. I'm starting it now. He struck a match, lit the burner. And for the first time in 10 days, the kitchen of the Hargrove Grand Hotel came alive. The first thing Curtis prepared was the red wine reduction for the 6th course. It was Augustin Morel's signature, a technique so precise that Morel had spent 30 years perfecting it and taught it to exactly one person. The method required patience that bordered on insanity. The wine had to be reduced at a temperature so low that a single degree higher would break the emulsion. It had to be folded, not stirred, folded, every 4 minutes for 3 consecutive hours. No shortcuts, no timers, only instinct. Curtis set the saucepan on the lowest flame and began. While the reduction whispered on the back burner, he built the rest of the menu with a speed and precision that silenced everyone in the room. Course 1. Amuse-bouche. A single spoonful of smoked oyster velouté with micro herbs and a drop of Tabasco oil. He made the velouté by hand, tasting twice, adjusting salt by fractions of a gram. The smoke came from a technique Odette used, charring pecan shells and letting the vapor infuse into cream. Course 2. Seared Louisiana crawfish tail on celery root puree with brown butter and chive blossoms. He taught Nora his grandmother's method for cleaning crawfish. 30 seconds per tail. Pinch, twist, pull. She had been taking 2 minutes each. By her 10th tail, she had it down to 40 seconds. By her 20th, she was smiling. Course 3. She crab bisque, Charleston's signature, but Curtis added his own layer. Smoked paprika cream floated on top with a single fried sage leaf. French precision underneath, Southern soul on the surface. Course 4. Pan-roasted Gulf redfish with sauce meuniere, compressed cucumber, and preserved lemon. Curtis filleted 6 fish in 4 minutes. His knife moved so fast that Wilson stopped prepping and simply watched. The cuts were surgical, identical. Each fillet weighed within 2 grams of the others. Course 5. Creole blood orange sorbet with a whisper of cayenne. Sweet first, then a slow burn at the back of the throat. Curtis designed it as a reset, a palate cleanser that was also a warning. Something bigger was coming. Course 6. The centerpiece. Slow braised short rib with Morel's red wine reduction, truffle grits, and roasted root vegetables. The grits were Odette's recipe. Stone ground, cooked for 2 hours with cream and a pinch of white truffle oil, a combination Morel had annotated in the journal with a single word: parfait. The short ribs had been braising since the moment Curtis entered the kitchen. The reduction was still folding on the back burner, darkening with each pass, building complexity with every minute. Course 7. Dessert. Beignets. Not architectural, not deconstructed, not reimagined. Just beignets. Golden, simple, dusted with powdered sugar, served with café au lait crème anglaise, his grandmother's exact recipe. The final page of the journal. By 8:45, every component was prepped, every station set, every plate template laid out. Curtis stood at the pass and looked at his team. Nora at the fish station, Wilson on vegetables, the third cook on plating. Glenn Archer still in the corner, arms still crossed, but he had quietly set up the dessert station 20 minutes ago when no one was watching. Curtis noticed. He did not say a word, but something in his chest shifted. 9 o'clock, the gala began. 200 guests filled the Pemberton room, crystal and candlelight. Eleanor Pemberton at the head table with Vivian Holt, the food critic whose pen could end a career or launch one. The first course went out. Polite nods, a few raised eyebrows, Spoons scraped bowls clean. The second course. Forks slowed. Guests looked at each other across tables. Something was different tonight. The third course. The first audible reaction. A woman near the window closed her eyes after the first spoonful and whispered, "Oh my God." The fourth course. Vivian Holt stopped writing notes. She set her pen down on the table. She simply ate. Slowly. Deliberately. As if listening to the food. The fifth course. The sorbet. Laughter rippled through the room as the cayenne kicked in. Unexpected, playful, brilliant. Guests laughed and pointed at each other's surprised faces. For a moment, 200 strangers became friends. The sixth course. The short rib arrived on a bed of truffle grits, with the red wine reduction pooled beside it like liquid velvet. Eleanor Pemberton cut a small piece. She placed it in her mouth, chewed once, twice, slowly. And then she stopped. She set down her fork very slowly. Her eyes closed. Her hand came to rest flat on the table. She recognized it. The slow fold reduction. The way the wine merged with the bone marrow at a molecular level. The depth that came from 3 hours of patient, meditative folding. It was Morel's method. She had tasted it twice before, in Lyon, from the hands of the master himself. But this was different. Layered beneath the French technique was something Morel never had. The warmth of allspice, the depth of Creole spice, the ghost of a grandmother's kitchen in New Orleans. It was not French, it was not Creole, it was both. It was new. It was Curtis. Eleanor leaned toward Vivian Holt and said quietly, "This is the finest bite of food I have had in 30 years." Vivian Holt did not respond. Her pen lay untouched on the tablecloth. She was already on her second piece, and her eyes had not left the plate. The seventh course. The beignets arrived. Simple, warm, powdered sugar drifting like snow. One woman at table 9, a guest from Louisiana who had not tasted beignets like these since her own grandmother passed, set down her fork, pressed her napkin to her eyes, and quietly cried. Then someone at table 3 began to clap. Table 5 joined. Then the entire room. 200 people rose to their feet, applause rolling through the Pemberton room like a wave that would not stop breaking. In the kitchen, Curtis heard it through the pass-through window. Nora was beside him, tears running down her face. Wilson was grinning so wide it looked painful. Even Glenn Archer, standing at the dessert station he had secretly prepared, was looking at the floor with something that might have been shame. Curtis pressed the leather journal to his chest, closed his eyes, and whispered 2 words that no one else could hear. "We did it, Grandma." Outside the kitchen, in the darkened hallway, Derek Sinclair stood alone. He had not entered the kitchen since Curtis took command. His face was gray. His hands hung empty at his sides. He stared through the window at the standing ovation and understood, with total, irreversible clarity, that his career at the Hargrove Grand was over. Not because anyone had fired him, not because Eleanor had said a word, but because every person in that room was applauding a man he had sent to wash dishes, and not one of them even knew his name. After the last plate was cleared and the applause had finally faded into the hum of satisfied conversation, Eleanor Pemberton walked into the kitchen. The staff parted without being asked. She moved through them the way she had moved through every room in her life, with the certainty of a woman who did not need permission to be anywhere. She stopped in front of Curtis. He was wiping down his station. The same instinct his grandmother had drilled into him since he was 6 years old. Always leave the kitchen cleaner than you found it. Eleanor placed Morel's letter on the counter. The wax seal was broken. The paper was creased from where she had gripped it. She smoothed it flat and read the key passage aloud, loud enough for every person in the kitchen to hear. If this man ever stands before you asking for a chance, know that I have given my life to food, and he is the only one I trust to carry it forward. She paused. Signed, Augustin Morel. No one moved. No one breathed. Eleanor looked at Curtis. I am offering you the position of executive chef of the Pemberton Room. Full creative control. A seat at the hotel's leadership table. Not the head chef position you applied for. The one above it. Curtis held her gaze. Then he said, I accept. On one condition. He looked at Nora. I choose my own team. Eleanor nodded once. Done. That evening, Derek Sinclair was called into Eleanor's office on the 4th floor. The meeting lasted less than 3 minutes. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She did not lecture. She did not list his failures. She said only one thing. You buried the most talented chef I have encountered since Augustin Morel in a dish pit. I need you to understand that before you leave this building. Derek was terminated, effective immediately. Glenn Archer was reassigned to a satellite property 60 miles outside Charleston. There was no shouting, no tantrum, no dramatic exit. Derek picked up a cardboard box from the front desk, packed his knives, and walked out through the lobby. The concierge held the door open for him, without a word. It was the longest walk of his life. 3 months later, the Pemberton Room was unrecognizable. Not the walls or the chandeliers, those remained as they had been for 100 years. What changed was the food, and with it, everything. Curtis redesigned the menu from the ground up. Every dish was a conversation between classical French technique and Louisiana Creole soul. Appetizers whispered Lyon. Mains sang New Orleans. Desserts spoke both languages at once. It was cuisine that never existed before Curtis created it, and once people tasted it, they could not forget. The restaurant was fully booked every night, 6-week waiting list. Guests flew in from New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. A couple from Paris made the trip because they heard a rumor. Someone in Charleston was cooking food that recalled Augustin Morel, layered with something Morel never had. They were not disappointed. They both wept over dessert. Vivian Holt's review, published 5 weeks after the gala. 2 full pages, the most she had ever given a single meal. She called the tasting menu the most emotionally intelligent meal I have ever consumed. The short rib contained more truth than most chefs produce in a lifetime. The beignets were so simple and so devastating that I forgot I was working. The review went viral. Curtis's name trended for 3 days. Food journalists descended on Charleston. Curtis declined most of them. He had never wanted his face on a screen. He wanted what he had always wanted: a kitchen, a team, and the freedom to cook. Then the quiet detail that mattered most. 2 months after the gala, Michelin inspectors were spotted at the Pemberton Room. Tuesday, unannounced, full tasting menu, 3 hours. The star Derek had lost was coming home. Nora Briscoe became sous chef, Curtis's first hire. She ran the kitchen with confidence now, free of the fear that defined her decade under Derek. The hollandaise technique Curtis whispered to her on day 4 became the standard method taught to every new cook who walked through the door. Raymond Cross returned as head sommelier at Curtis's personal request. He rebuilt the wine program to honor both French and Creole roots. The Gevrey Chambertin from the gala night became the signature pour. The leather journal now lived in a glass case beside the kitchen entrance. Below it, a brass plaque. Odette Lancaster and Augustin Morel. 2 kitchens, 1 language. Every cook passed it each morning. The pain that once soaked those pages, dirty water, a wet floor, mocking laughter, had become something luminous. Beside the journal, in a matching frame under glass, hung Morel's letter. Wax seal still broken, words visible for anyone who paused to read. One evening after service, Curtis sat alone in the empty kitchen. He dialed his grandmother's old number. It had been disconnected for years. He knew that. He let it ring anyway, listening to the empty tone, as if somewhere on the other end she might still pick up. Then he opened the journal to the first blank page, picked up a pen, and began writing his own recipe. 400 miles away, in a mid-range steakhouse outside Atlanta, Derek Sinclair saw Curtis Lancaster's face on the cover of a food magazine at a grocery checkout. He picked it up, stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he put it back on the rack and walked out into the parking lot alone. That was his punishment. Not ruin, not poverty, just irrelevance. The quiet understanding that the man he tried to erase was now on the cover of a magazine, and nobody in the world remembered Derek Sinclair's name. Curtis Lancaster did not succeed because someone finally gave him permission. He succeeded because he never needed it. His talent existed before Derek Sinclair's approval, before Eleanor Pemberton's recognition, before Vivian Holt's review, before the standing ovation. It existed long before any of them. In a small, warm kitchen in New Orleans, when a grandmother placed a wooden spoon in a 6-year-old boy's hand and said, "Cook with love, and the world will hear you." That talent did not appear the night of the centennial gala. It was always there. Every day Curtis scrubbed pots, it was there. Every time Glenn threw the journal on the wet floor, it was there. Every moment Derek looked through him like he was invisible, it was there, waiting, patient, unbroken. Burning quiet and steady like a pilot light that no amount of cruelty could blow out. The people who gatekeep greatness, who decide that talent must look a certain way, come from a certain place, wear a certain skin, are never the ones who create anything worth remembering. They stand between creation and the world, and they always lose. Not with a bang. They lose slowly, quietly, the way Derek lost, by becoming invisible while the person they tried to erase became unforgettable. Not that justice always arrives on time, not that the world is fair, but real talent does not care about the size of the room it is locked inside. It does not shrink. It does not fade. It waits. And when the door opens, even just a crack, it fills every room it enters. The people who tried to keep that door shut are left standing in the hallway alone, wondering how they missed what was right in front of them. Talent does not knock twice. It walks in once. If you are too blind to see it, someone else surely will. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a time someone saw only what they wanted to see, drop a comment and tell me your story. The moment someone underestimated you. What happened next? And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be heard, hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs it today. Hashtag talent has no color. Hashtag Curtis Lancaster. Hashtag the Hargrove Grand. Hashtag never underestimate.
Here's what I want to carry with you. What someone teaches you will love. That's yours forever. Nobody can take it. They can take your job, they can take your title, they can put you in a room you don't belong in and pretend you're nothing. But the thing you learned, the skill in your hands, the knowledge in your head, the craft you've spent years building, that stays no matter what. So, don't waste your energy arguing with people who already decided who you are. Don't explain yourself, don't beg. Just keep sharpening what you know, quietly, patiently, because one day your moment will come, and when it does, you won't need words. You just do the thing you always known how to do, and every mouth that was laughing will go silent. That's the power of craft. That's the power of what someone who loved you poured into your hands. That doesn't fade, it doesn't break, the ways until the world is ready to say it. Like, share, and subscribe. Real stories, real this every week. And remember, what you were taught with love, nobody can wash away. Nobody, ever.